I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's first turn to John Solomon. John Solomon sat down with billionaire Oleg Deripaska, who, if people don't know who that is, you'll see a picture on the video right now. And of course, you can remember him. We've said it many times. He was the guy in that famous video with Putin where he took his pen and he asked for his pen back. That video went viral. Look it up. I mean, if you haven't seen that video, take a look at it. That is Oleg Deripaska.
Yes.
And Alexander, I will read you the quote that he gave to Solomon after. Give us a little bit of introduction as to what Solomon says, and then I'm going to read you the quote that, in my opinion, exonerates Manafort to a degree. Yes. I mean, you're the lawyer, you know better. Absolutely. But to me, it was wow. Yes. But anyway, go ahead, Alexander.
I mean, the key point, which I think Deripaska is making, I mean, there's actually two things which are really very interesting about this interview. And by the way, it's John Solomon again at the Hill. He and Sarah Carter are turning out to be the outstanding investigative reporters in unearthing all the Russiagate nonsense. But the essential point that Deripaska is making, it seems to me, is about Manafort. And he's pointing out that, in fact, it is inconceivable that Manafort was ever involved in any sort of collusion allegation. Deripaska actually had informed the US authorities that he was sure that there was no truth to it, and that he was absolutely sure that Manafort, with whom he had had contacts, could not have been involved in any collusion with the Russians. And the other thing that he's disclosed is the deep involvement with Deripaska of Christopher Steele, the compiler of the now notorious Steele Dossier, which is, in fact, as we now know, the actual foundation text of the whole collusion theory. So, again, Deripaska says that he's absolutely incredulous when he heard that Steele was circulating all this nonsense, and he told the United States authorities all of this. So the US had knowledge from Deripaska, a man in a position to know that the collusion allegations were untrue and that Christopher Steele was not to be relied upon.
Alexander, before I read you the quote for Manafort, let's take a look at the Manafort part, and then we'll take a look at the Steele part.
Yeah,
but very, very quickly, before I read you the quote for Manafort, what do you think this signals, the fact that Deripaska is actually sitting down with Solomon and giving this interview?
Well, I think that Deripaska feels extremely angry, because I think that Deripaska hasn't got over the fact that he was very seriously sanctioned by the US a year ago. And his point to Solomon is that he actually helped the US quite a lot at a time to try to rescue an FBI agent who had been taken who'd been taken prisoner in Iran. He'd been a good source for the United States. He'd been a good friend of the United States. He's not an associate of Putin's. And I think that Deripaska feels that the reason the US went out of its way to sanction him last year was because he was not telling the US what it wanted to hear about Manafort, about Steele, and about collusion. And I think he now feels that this is the time for him to come along and talk to someone like Solomon and set the record straight and explain to the US people, to the American people, through a prominent American journalist, three things about himself. Firstly, that he has provided actual assistance to the United States. He has helped the United States try to retrieve one of its officials who is in serious trouble in Iran. The second is that the Manafort story is nonsense, and that Deripaska explained this to the US authorities. The second is that the Christopher Steele dossier is nonsense, and that he explained this to the US authorities, and that despite all of this help that he was providing to the US, both with the official who is in trouble in Iran, and by providing the US with all this valuable information, he is the person who is being sanctioned. And I think that is what has angered Deripaska and has made him come out and speak in this way. Now, Deripaska is no friend of Putin's, and I really want to stress this, but he is one of Russia's most pivotal business people. He is in a position to know many things. And he knows Manafort, and he knows Steele, and he knows the political situation in Russia. What he says, as Solomon points out, carries a great deal of authority.
And he knows Mueller, and he knows McCabe. And on a side note, Alexander, going back to what you said about Deripaska helping the United States, it was Robert Mueller who was FBI director when Deripaska was using his own money, actually.
Exactly.
To secure the release of Robert Levinson. And it was McCabe who was also handling that case. Yes. So, I mean, these guys go way back.
Absolutely.
And Deripaska put his own money to try and help Levinson get out of Iran.
Exactly. I mean, he was somebody who went a considerable distance to help the United States. I mean, we have to understand this. I mean, Deripaska is not part of Putin's, entourage. He is a friend of the United States. His company, Rusal, was at one point registered in England. I mean, it was not registered in Russia. He was trying to relocate a lot of his businesses out of Russia. Obviously, he is still a very prominent person in Russia. But he was working with Mueller. He was working with McCabe. He knows Manafort. He knows Steele. He has information about these people. He's helping the FBI help one of its own. He's putting his own money in it. And what is his reward for all these things? He gets hit by all-embracing sanctions and is forced, by the way, to dilute his own ownership of his own company, Rusal, one of the world's biggest aluminium companies, which he built up. So he's a very angry man who feels very betrayed. And he's now coming forward and he's saying these things. But putting aside Deripaska's feelings of anger and betrayal, I mean, I think we do need to attend very closely to what he is saying. Right. He told the US there is no collusion going on involving Manafort. We now know that's true.
Right.
He also said Steele is not reliable. We know that's true.
Let's get to the Manafort quote, and you could break it down, because this is an incredible quote that Solomon has picked up here. Let me read it to you, Alexander. And I quote Deripaska. "I told them straightforward, look, I'm not a friend with him," referring to Manafort. "Apparently not, because I started a court case against him 6 or 9 months before. But since I'm Russian, I would be very surprised that anyone from Russia would try to approach him for any reason and wouldn't come and ask me my opinion," he said, recounting exactly what he says he told the FBI agents that day. Quote, "I told them straightforward, I just don't believe that he would represent any Russian interests." Speaking about Manafort once again. "And knowing what he's doing on Ukraine for the last, 7 or 8 years, end quote. Alexander, I've been saying it. You've been saying it. We've been saying it.
Absolutely.
Deripaska is confirming everything we have reporting. Manafort was not working for Russia in Ukraine. Alexander.
In any way. I mean, this is something, it really annoys me still that I hear about how Manafort was working for a pro-Russian party in Ukraine. Manafort was not working for a pro-Russian party in Ukraine. He was working against Russian interests in Ukraine. He was the advisor of President Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine, whose policy was to try to keep a distance from Russia. And Manafort was encouraging him in that policy. He was encouraging him to agree this association agreement with the EU. And he was working very closely with the US Embassy in order to work through Yanukovych to lessen Russian influence in Ukraine. He was an agent of the United States, never of Russia. And what Deripaska says is absolutely correct. No Russian would ever collaborate or work with Paul Manafort on any scheme involving Russian influence, any attempt by Russia to influence the US elections, for the very simple reason that they wouldn't trust Manafort. Manafort is not someone the Russians see as an ally. They see him as an enemy. He is an adversary, not a friend.
Okay, let's get to the Steele part of this article by Solomon. It gets better. So once again, let me pull from the article, Alexander. This is from John Solomon as he was speaking to Deripaska. And he says, and Deripaska's complicated tale goes on. His legal team in 2012 hired Steele, the former British MI6 agent, to do some research for a lawsuit involving a business rival that Deripaska was fighting in London. Quote, "It was a research project to support what was the case against me in London. But my understanding is that the lawyers trusted him for some reason," referring to Steele, "and he was for quite a time on retainer. Deripaska was unaware, though, that Steele was also working for the FBI on, among other things, a special program to recruit Russian oligarchs to provide intelligence on Putin and Russian organized crime." Alexander says, it's unbelievable what is going on here. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly interesting because, of course, one of the stories that's been circulating, and I have given it some credence, by the way, but I think we can't any longer, is that Steele might have got some of the information that appeared in his dossier through Deripaska, who, as I said, is no friend of Putin's. We now know that isn't true. And we also now know that Deripaska, when he discovered what Steele was up to, was again absolutely astonished and didn't give any credence to it. I mean, he didn't think that Steele's work had any value. So we are looking at a exposure of Steele. We're looking at an exposure of the Manafort allegations. And if I can just go back to Manafort, I know you want to discuss Steele, but let's just make this point, because it's a point that some of Manafort's defense team, who are now considering appeals, are really looking into, is that, of course, the FBI and the Justice Department, when they prosecuted Manafort, didn't disclose any of this information
I was just going
to Manafort's legal team. And that is important because one of the key points that Manafort was making is that, you know, whatever you think about me, or, you know, these allegations of tax evasion, of, you know, wire fraud or whatever, they've got nothing to do with the collusion allegations. And Mueller, whose job is to look at the collusion allegations, should not be investigating me. And now we know that actually Mueller had information that he should not have been investigating Manafort from Deripaska, because Deripaska had told the US that Manafort is not involved in any collusion and cannot be involved in any collusion. And this would have been relevant to Manafort's defense, and it was not passed on. Now, that may create an appeal point. We shall see.
That's an incredible revelation from Deripaska and from Solomon in this post, because it shows that Mueller was not interested in getting to the truth.
No.
At all.
I mean, we've discussed this again many times. I mean, Mueller's primary concern was to construct a case against Donald Trump. He wasn't looking for any information that would undermine the case he was constructing. His initial purpose in going after Manafort was because I think he may have suspected that Manafort was involved in all sorts of things. But then he tried to squeeze Manafort. He was, in effect, applying the third degree on Manafort, hoping to do some sort of a deal with Manafort, whereby Manafort would then come and give evidence against other people in the Trump campaign in order to construct this case of collusion. Now, that's not just my theory. It was also the theory of Judge Ellis, who was the judge who tried Manafort. He actually said to the prosecutors, "You're not really interested in Manafort, you're interested in Donald Trump." That's what this case ultimately is all about. And we see now evidence from Deripaska which confirms this, because Deripaska is now saying, actually, there was no grounds as part of a collusion investigation to investigate Manafort at all, and therefore Mueller had no business investigating him and no business prosecuting him.
And no one ever talks about Deripaska's connections to Mueller, to McCabe, what they were up to in 2012. None of this stuff is ever talked about in the establishment mainstream media. None of it. And so now we understand, Alexander, that it looks like Deripaska was actually telling Mueller all this Manafort stuff is bogus. Yes. And Deripaska was not the source for Steele's dossier. But we do know now two Russians that appear to be the source for the Steele dossier. And the first Russian that appears to be the source is someone named Simon Kukets. And the second Russian who appears to be the source is Ilya Zalislavsky.
Yes. Now, I should say very clearly that I'm not familiar with either of these two people, but this information has come from the State Department. This is the interviews that Christopher Steele had with the State Department, in which he disclosed an awful lot of information about his dossier and met at the State Department, as he didn't at the FBI, and as I suspect he didn't either at the CIA or with MI6 in Britain. He met at the State Department a wall of skepticism. It was the State Department, for example, that picked up that he was talking about a Russian consulate in Miami, in Florida, where there is in fact no Russian consulate, and details of this kind. Anyway, the State Department people who interviewed Steele pressed him as to who his sources were, and he appears to have identified two sources, and these are these two people that you're talking about. Now, I don't know them. I don't know of them. But there's a number of things that stood out for me. Firstly, neither of them is based in Russia.
Right.
They're both outside Russia. So they are not, in fact, present on the scene. That must, by definition, reduce their ability to maintain contacts with Russian sources. Secondly, neither of these people appears to be in good standing with the Russian authorities, or to be the sort of people who you would expect to be in a position to get information from the Kremlin. I mean, it's inconceivable that they would. The third is that both of them have been reported to be in Western intelligence assets. Now, I don't know whether that is true, but it's possible. The fourth thing, which I find the most interesting of all, though, is that Kukes appears to have had extremely strong connections with Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who is another Russian oligarch who ran what was formerly Russia's biggest oil company, Yukos, who in 2003 was famously arrested by the Russian authorities on charges of massive fraud and tax evasion, whose company, Yukos, was then dissolved and absorbed by the Russian state oil company, Rosneft, and who has been the subject of a huge case in Russia, which has been taken up by many people in the West. And Khodorkovsky spent a long time in prison in Russia. He was released back in 2013. He now, I think, largely lives in Switzerland, and he continues with the very significant resources that he still has to maintain a campaign against the Russian authorities and Mr. Putin. And of course, he continues to publicize his various allegations that he was the victim not of tax evasion or fraud, as the Russian authorities and the European Court of Human Rights both say, but that he was somehow a victim of, the Putin dictatorship. I mean, the kind of things that, frankly, you would expect a person like him to say. Anyway, Kukes seems to have worked for Khodorkovsky. He worked for Khodorkovsky. He worked in UCOS, and he worked for various companies that seem to have been associated with Khodorkovsky. And from what I can understand, he still seems to have a connection to Khodorkovsky. Now, I'm not saying that Khodorkovsky is the person who originated the allegations that appear in the dossier, but anybody who is close to Khodorkovsky, as Kukes appears to be, is almost by definition going to be hostile to the Russian government, most unlikely to be able to get any kind of reliable information out of the Russian government, and is almost certain to be spreading negative stories about the Russian government in order to put it in the worst possible light. So that's what I think about this information. I think it's, again, further information to doubt that the Steele dossier has any reliability. Well, I mean, it's been almost completely discredited anyway, but it gives an insight into how it might have been created by people who seem to be very hostile to Putin and to the Russian government, and out to make trouble.
Okay, so we have an email that was obtained by Judicial Watch, Alexander, from Kathleen Kavalich, who she was the person that interviewed or that spoke with Steele at the State Department and thought Steele was a pretty shady character. Yes. She was the one that talked about the consulate in Miami, that there is not one, and all these things. So she sent an email to Bruce Orr.
Yes.
There's that name again, Bruce Orr.
Yeah.
And she said that Tom Firestone, who was a CIA guy in Russia, who seems to have brought Kukes into the fold of the CIA. So Kukes she's pretty much saying that he was a spy in Russia. She said, Tom Firestone, CIA brought him in. She's speaking to Orr now. She's emailing Orr. Kukes had left Russia because he said he was concerned he might be investigated. As I recall, he said had gotten a summons to a court on some issue. Per Tom, Kukes was trying to decide whether to relocate to the U.S. He was supposedly worried about his safety. I think maybe he was also looking at Israel. Not sure where he ended up.
Well,
what you're seeing here is an admission from a State Department official to a DOJ official that this guy Kukes was a spy.
Exactly.
And he's going to be the source now for the Steele dossier?
Well, exactly. I mean, a CIA asset and a person with a very shady past on the run from the Russian authorities. So, I mean, I have to say that Kavalich seems to have had her wits about her. She seems to have been a very incisive and intelligent official who tumbled to the absurdities of what Steele was saying very quickly. And the important point about this is that, of course, she's messaging Bruce Orr. And we know that Bruce Orr plays a pivotal role in getting Christopher Steele's dossier, accepted and acted upon by the FBI and by the Justice Department, and who became at one point the liaison between the FBI and Christopher Steele after Christopher Steele was sacked as an informer because he had been talking to the media.
And Nellie, or his wife.
And indeed, and one should add, of course, that Nellie, who is his wife, is an employee of Fusion GPS, which was the company that was in fact directly employing Christopher Steele. So it's all really, really tangled and really rather awful, actually. But the point is that here they were getting warnings from a senior official in the State Department, somebody who knows Russia well, and Kovalich clearly has a real understanding of Russian affairs. And she's warning the FBI, look, these people are very dodgy. Christopher Steele is talking nonsense about, Christopher Steele producing dossiers which are talking nonsense about Russian consulates in Miami which don't exist. And his dossier seems to be relying upon evidence from a CIA asset who's on the run from the Russian authorities. And yet the FBI and Brussels disregard all these warnings and go and use Steele's dossier to obtain FISA warrants. So that is what is really incredible about all of this.
All right, let's get to Ilya Zaslavsky. Tough name. And he's got some connections in London, in the UK, which I'm hoping can clear up for us, Alexander. He is part of Chatham House.
Yeah.
Am I pronouncing that correct?
Absolutely, Chatham House.
He's part of Chatham House for several years. He's met with the Queen.
Yeah.
In 2016, he regularly provided MI6 with field reports from the U.S. that were collected by the anti-Trump alliance of Ukrainian and several anti-Putin NGOs and other political organizations, including Alexandra Chalupa's action groups.
Well, there you go.
There you have it. Once again, Chalupa, Ukraine. What's Chatham House and what's the connection there?
Chatham House is a very high-powered, extremely high-powered forum where the British elite discusses foreign and security policy. You get the most high-powered people, the foreign secretary, foreign diplomats, intelligence officers. They come there and they discuss things and they produce often very interesting research documents and analytical documents. It is, if you like, the British government's most senior foreign policy forum and think tank. It is about as establishment in Britain as you can get. It's extraordinarily high-powered. And whilst I'm not going to say that everybody who participates in it is necessarily vetted, I mean, you have to be somebody who carries a great deal of traction to be. And in this particular case, it seems that this individual, who, again, I must stress, is new to me. I've not come across him before. We're now given information that he was also connected with British intelligence, with British intelligence, the special intelligence, the British intelligence service, MI6, and that apparently he is operating in the highest political and social circles in London. Now, again, this is someone who it's quite likely that Christopher Steele would have met and would have known. Remember, Christopher Steele is an ex-MI6 officer, and he's based in London, and his interest is Russia. So it's logical that these two people would know each other, which makes it quite plausible that he is a source, this man is a source. But again, he's not someone who's in good standing with the Kremlin. He's not someone whose information is necessarily going to be reliable about the inner discussions that happen inside the Kremlin. And most importantly, he's someone who, is going to want to keep his British contacts happy by, one fears, playing to their prejudices about Russia, which, as we know, are overwhelmingly negative.
It sounds to me that this guy is more like a UK deep state insider than
Well, then
a Russian spy or a Russian
well,
informant.
well,
I
it
mean, would you
seems
be
so.
able? Would you be at Chatham House and meet with the Queen if you were not completely vetted, or if there
You
was any
might
suspicion you were a Russian informant?
you might be able to get to Chatham House in the sense that Chatham House will sometimes invite people from Russia who are part of the Russian government to speak there, but that will be openly done because they might be interested in hearing the Russian point of view on some issues. This person seems to be much more deeply involved in these kind of things, and of course, I mean, we have information that he was in fact connected with British intelligence, and there's this very interesting Ukrainian connection also.
Right.
Now, I'm going to say something about this because, again, I don't want to claim to know more than I do, but it's been fairly obvious to me for some time now that there is a very strong connection between the British intelligence and foreign policy community and the Ukrainian foreign policy and intelligence community and various Ukrainian lobby groups. And of course, Mr. Chalupa's name has come up previously in connection with the Russiagate affair. So, there may be some connection there also. Now, as I said, I'm not going to pretend that I have inside knowledge about this because I don't. But it's a fact that Britain took up the cause of the Maidan movement in Ukraine and has supported the Maidan government in Ukraine with extraordinary fervor ever since the change of government in Ukraine in 2014. And it's no secret that the British government and the British authorities were extremely worried about the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president of the United States and perhaps reversing policy, US policy on Ukraine and in relation to Syria. So someone who is so well connected with Ukraine and with British intelligence and who possibly knows Christopher Steele, one can see the possible motivations to come up with claims which might not turn out to be true, but which might have a very strong anti-Russian quality. Now, I want to stress, as I don't know what this person said, to what extent he was a source, and what he said to Steele, and whether Steele was reporting it properly. But the key point, again, is he is not based in Russia during this whole period, and he seems to be a Western intelligence asset, certainly not someone in good standing in the Kremlin.
Well, we've said it many times in many videos, Alexander, that when you're looking at this soft coup against Trump,
yes,
it seems like you're always coming back to the UK, which seems to me, it seems like it's the nexus of all of this stuff that was going on. It doesn't seem that to me like it was in the United States at all. A lot of this was just taking place in London, all of it.
Yes.
From Papadopoulos to this information right now, to Christopher Steele, all of it was happening in London. And then you're always coming back to this Ukraine connection, whether you're talking about Joe Biden, whether you're talking about Poroshenko openly supporting Hillary Clinton and openly, expressing his dislike in Trump, or whether you're coming back to Alexander Chalupa, working with the DNC to get dirt on Trump. And of course, whether you're talking about Paul Manafort and what was going on in Ukraine and his work there. And now you have Deripaska kind of, tying things up here and connecting a lot of dots.
Yes.
Here are these two countries over and over and over again.
Exactly. And it cries out for thorough and proper investigation to arrive at the truth. Because clearly there are just too many connections now to talk about coincidence. And I would add, one of the things that we mentioned, of course, was, Joseph Mifsud turning up in Rome, meeting Papadopoulos, turning up in Rome, and Christopher Steele meeting the FBI in Rome, and based near a CIA school. And all these connections now seem to be too strong. And one wonders how much investigation now is actually going on, because clearly John Solomon at the Hill is finding out things. Sarah Carter also finds out things. But a properly briefed investigator working for the Justice Department, with all the power of the United States behind him, like perhaps John Durham, would surely be able to get to the truth, and get to the truth very quickly, because now we know all the names, we know all the people to speak to, and to get their stories, and to start comparing their stories, and to find out what really happened.
And let's not forget the one person that's sitting in a UK prison right now is Julian Assange, who knows exactly what was going on.
Well, there we go. And there's another person, as I said, that needs to be spoken to and needs to be interviewed. So this very strange nexus of people coming together. And, Deripaska in Moscow looks at all of this and he says, my God, this is the man, Christopher Steele, that I was employing. And he's involved in all of this.
And everything's happening in London. Everything is happening in London.
Yes, in London. Exactly.
What was Theresa May up to? Well, what was Cameron up to?
Well,
did they know about all this stuff? Were they working with Obama? There's so many questions that
I
cross one's mind.
I think it is inconceivable, and I said this before, that all this was going on in London without the Prime Minister, who at that time was David Cameron, and the Home Secretary, who at that time was Theresa May. I cannot believe that they weren't kept informed about what was going on. The other person who would have been briefed about it would have been the Foreign Secretary, who I believe at that time was Philip Hammond, who is now our Chancellor of the Exchequer, our Finance Minister. So all of these people would have known what was going on and would have been able to compare notes with each other. Of that, I have no doubt.
All neoliberals, all Remainers, all pro-Obama, all pro-Hillary.
Oh, indeed, absolutely. All of them also terrified at the prospect of a rapprochement between the United States and Russia, which is what Donald Trump seemed to be campaigning for. So, and of course, what we don't know is where the initiative for all this was coming from, whether, as I said, it came from within Britain, whether it was British officials or British public figures who were concerned about the danger from Donald Trump, or whether it came from the United States, with people in the United States determined to get Hillary into the presidency, into the White House, and subcontracting much of the work out to their British friends, or whether perhaps there was an interchange between the two, and that this, in fact, led to this thing taking off in the way that it did. But we have to get to the bottom of this story, because without this knowledge, there will continue to be a cloud over the United States and its political and constitutional system, because you're absolutely correct to say that this is a plot against Donald Trump and the presidency and ultimately the American people whose votes in the United States election there was an attempt to manipulate them and then to set them aside. And the intelligence agencies of both Britain and the United States seem to have been deeply involved in all of this.
Incredible. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. That was a 40-minute video, but boy, did we cover a lot of ground.
Well, with Russiagate, one always does. And we have to say this to our viewers. Russiagate is complicated because the people who were involved in it want to make it so. They don't want us to see the simple truth behind what this was, which was a plot to stop Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. And because it looks so complicated, we have to spend time breaking it down and discussing it. But hopefully we will get to the bottom of things before very long.
And we'll have 2 ebooks coming out on Russiagate, hopefully within next week. So keep an eye out for those ebooks as well. They will be on the Duran shop, and Alexander's going to put a forward to those ebooks. And we'll probably do a special video during those ebooks launch as well. But keep an eye out for those next week.
Absolutely.
Guys, donate to us, PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar. That really helps us out a lot. Go to theduran.com. Follow us on Instagram, theduran_com. And, of course, Alexander was holding up 2 magic mugs.
2 magic mugs.
Which, if you drink from those mugs, Russiagate will clear up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is why I drink my tea from this mug, because, as I said, I'm drinking green tea from China, from Guangzhou, which is the former capital of China, visited by Marco Polo, by the way, in the 13th century, when it was the most advanced and civilized city in the world. And he was astonished by all the things he saw there. And he would have been astonished by mugs like this, because they didn't have porcelain of this quality in the Venice that Marco Polo came from. Porcelain, as we all know, was invented in China, and they did have it then. But my goodness, this is beautiful porcelain here in this mug, and it's perfect for drinking a green tea, which is what I'm drinking on a very hot day in London. And you can see that this mug also has the double-headed eagle, which is our eagle, the Duran eagle. It is the eagle that points to the east and the west, as we do. And here we have a story which covers both Russia and America, so both the east and the west. And you can see also the same double-headed eagle here on my beautiful 100% cotton, incredibly comfortable.
I've got the black one, yeah.
The black one, the polo shirt. Which is amazingly comfortable on a hot day like this, and amazingly stylish also. And we have the double-headed eagle of Russia, for comparison, on this other mug, which has St. George on his horse, slaying the dragon of untruth, which is what we do. And my God, when we talk about Russiagate, we've had to slay many dragons of untruth, because
you spent 40 minutes talking about it.
Well, 40 minutes talking about it, because, I mean, seriously, I mean, this is one of the most extraordinary fabrications of news that I've ever known of. Perhaps it is the biggest that I've ever known on. I mean, it's the 3 years of the political life of the United States has been dominated by a fake story. So, I mean, it needs a St. George to slay it, right. And we are the St. George at the Duran. So support our work, help us, buy mugs like this, buy beautiful shirts like this.
Share the channel outside of YouTube, because they are suppressing our channel, and it's very hard to reach new users. Absolutely. And YouTube doesn't share our channel, doesn't expose our channel to new users, so we can grow our audience. So share the channel on Gab, on Minds. We're on BitChute. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. Alexander, we also have a mug, which is which has now become the famous mug of Vladimir Putin that he had at the G20, which is the small, double-headed eagle crest.
Yes,
I mean, I should explain as well on our shop.
Indeed, this is the double-headed eagle of Moscow, and it's got the it's the coat of arms of Imperial Moscow, which it's still the coat of arms of Moscow, but he has his mug, which is the same as on our mug, has the current Russian state emblem, which is actually extremely elegant, and you see it now appearing in on Russian ships and Russian buildings. And of course, also on our Duran mugs, because it's another double-headed eagle to add to our collection, and it's on a mug drunk by Mr. Putin, one of the key figures in geopolitics, which is, of course, what we are here on the Duran to analyze. So Alex is absolutely right. we're being suppressed in every conceivable way. People are blocking us from expanding. They're doing everything they can to restrict the circulation of our videos. So every piece of support that we get from you, our viewers, makes it possible for us to provide you with this level of analysis. I don't think, and I'm not, I think, boasting when I say you won't find it in many other places.
All right. The link for the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Alexander, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us and listening to this fascinating video. Until next time, everybody, take care.